What's up guys, Sean here, and today we're going to talk about the state of the Democratic primary for this 2020 election season. But before we get started, I have a major announcement. On July 11th in Milwaukee, Wisconsin of this year, just ahead of the Democratic National Convention, I will be at an event called the Better Discourse event, which is being put on by Mythicists or Myth-Informed, the Myth people, that's what they like to be called. And we will be covering a number of topics that won't be covered by the Democratic Party. And it's going to be a great event where you can meet me and a bunch of other content creators that you might enjoy in person. You guys can come out to the event, listen to the panels, and they're selling tickets to the after party. And I have to say, after party was pretty amazing. I went to the Minds IRL event where I didn't speak and I met a lot of fans. I met a lot of creators and it was an amazing time. So definitely come out to this event if you guys are interested in meeting me or any of these other creators. The speakers list right now, which I'm pretty sure is incomplete, more will be added later, includes people like Lauren Chen. Lauren Chen is somebody who I met in the Minds IRL conference. Amazing person. If you've ever wanted to meet her, definitely get your ticket. Book your ticket to Milwaukee and make it happen. Sargon of Akkad is going to be there. I don't think Sargon needs an introduction. I feel like everybody knows who he is. He's been around forever. You could also see and meet people like Melissa Chen, who, contrary to what people on the internet say, is not related to Lauren, the redheaded libertarian, and so many more speakers. And what I mean by so many more speakers is I forgot to look up the list of speakers, so I'm just pulling this off of memory at this point in the video, but I assure you, so many more speakers. So yeah, you have 6 months. The website to get tickets is betterdiscourseevent.com. Link will be in the description, and if you buy a ticket, then, message me on Twitter, and I'll be happy to meet you when you're there. Now that we got all that stuff out of the way, let's get into the main topic of today, which is the remaining Democratic candidates as we are approaching a new debate and the Iowa caucus. So I've gotten a little bit of criticism on my channel in my coverage of the 2020 race that essentially I'm covering the campaigns and how people are doing in the campaign and covering personal issues that I think will affect the campaign and not talking about policy enough. And I just want you to know that's not going to change in this video. We are covering the campaigns and the candidates that I think are going to win, the candidates that I think are falling, etc., etc. And the reason why I'm doing that is because there's too many candidates in the race, and individual policy breakdowns for candidates that are polling at like 6 or 7% are incredibly pointless. When the field gets whittled down and we actually got through a couple of primaries, I might do some policy breakdowns from the top tier candidates. But why would I spend a lot of time breaking down like Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax when I don't think Elizabeth Warren is going to be a candidate in a month? Speaking of Elizabeth Warren, I gotta give her credit where credit is due. Out of all the candidates that I covered and I sorted into irrelevant and relevant baskets, Elizabeth Warren has proved me wrong for the majority of this campaign. I thought Warren was going to be in a lot of trouble because Bernie Sanders ran the last time around and he got a lot of the base that Elizabeth Warren would be aiming for, and I thought her not running in the last race against Hillary Clinton was really going to hurt her in this race. But throughout these primaries, she has been going up in the polls up until very recently. And while she is falling in the polls now overall, she's not falling for any of the reasons that I laid out in that initial video. I thought the Native American thing was going to hurt Elizabeth Warren a lot more than it actually did, because I assumed that her political opponents would eventually bring it up and use it against her. But throughout this race, even when she was the front runner, nobody did, and I'm shocked that nobody did that.
My Aunt Bee has walked by that picture at least 1,000 times, remarked that her father, my papa, had high cheekbones like all of the Indians do, because that's how she saw it. And she said, and your mother got those same great cheekbones, and I didn't. She thought this was the bad deal she had gotten in life.
Now, there is a generalized narrative around Elizabeth Warren that she is a deeply dishonest politician, but I can't take credit for that because I was talking specifically about her dishonesty, about her heritage, and instead, this is about her dishonesty in a lot of other areas. For instance, Elizabeth Warren talks a lot about how she doesn't take big money and she doesn't have big money donors, which is completely untrue because she took big money donors to her Senate campaign and then she just rolled over the money from her Senate campaign to her presidential campaign. So all those donors and all those fundraisers that she criticizes other candidates for are all things that she did while running for Senate in Massachusetts. And those big donor dollars make up a significant portion of her campaign war chest. Another example of Elizabeth Warren's dishonesty coming to light is when she claimed that she was fired from her job as a teacher because she got pregnant. According to her, once the principal found out that she was pregnant, they decided that they would no longer offer her the position. But what actually happened and what came to light was that the school board actually wanted to rehire her. This was in spite of the fact that Elizabeth Warren was not qualified to be a teacher. She didn't have the appropriate certification, but they liked her so much that they were willing to hire her back. And in fact, they offered her the job, and it's on record that she refused to take the job. So Elizabeth Warren is trying to play up the female victim narrative in order to boost her campaign, and she got caught red-handed doing it. And I think the most recent one was her claiming that her dad was a janitor, trying to downplay how successful he was and how good of a provider he was for the family. And it turns out that that was not the case. He actually had a much higher position. But we've seen politicians from time to time try to play down their parents or where they came from in order to make themselves seem more relatable. So on the scale of Elizabeth Warren lies, this doesn't rank that high. Now I have to pause here because I'm sure a lot of you have already made comments about how Evil Bad Orange Man is the biggest liar in politics, so it's hypocritical for me to call Elizabeth Warren deeply dishonest and not call Evil Bad Orange Man a liar. And all I can say is, while that is true, Donald Trump is not known for being a strict truth teller, there's a difference in kind to the lies that he will tell versus the ones that Elizabeth Warren will tell. Elizabeth Warren is telling the same shady, dishonest politician lies that we're all used to and we're all sick of. And Donald Trump tells a lot of salesman lies where he pumps up his achievements, he pumps up himself, and he's basically bragging and over-bragging about himself as compared to Elizabeth Warren, who's trying to be more relatable to the average person, which comes off as being far less relatable to the average person. Also, a lot of the things that they attribute to Evil Bad Orange Man as lies, like that list of 10,000 plus lies that he's told since he took office that the Washington Post is so proud of, are meaningless nitpicks and sometimes just lies by the media. Remember, they fact-checked him on whether or not the stack of burgers that he bought would stack up to be a mile high in an event that was for a college national championship team. Obviously, saying something stacks up a mile high is hyperbole, but that counts as one of the lies that Evil Bad Orange Man told. Also, there's the infamous Hillary Clinton smashed her BlackBerry with a hammer fact check, where the fact checkers basically confirmed that Hillary Clinton's BlackBerry was destroyed with a hammer in at least one instance, but said it was false because her staffer was likely the one who used the hammer, and in other instances where she destroyed her phones, she might not have used the hammer. That's a legitimate fact check, and I'm going to link that in the description so you can read it over, because it's even more ridiculous than I'm presenting it. So yeah, while it is true that Evil Bad Orange Man is not exactly wedded to the truth, that 10,000 lie number is full of a lot of nonsensical instances. Now, the next candidate that I want to talk about is not going to be appearing in the debate, but the reason I want to talk about him is because he is actually polling reasonably high for somebody who hadn't appeared in the debates, and he's spending a ton of money on advertising, and that's former mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg. Now, I have to be honest, I'm not a fan of Michael Bloomberg. I've actually called Michael Bloomberg in the past the anti-libertarian, because if you line up Michael Bloomberg's positions across the board, they are stunningly anti-libertarian. Michael Bloomberg is a regulation machine. He tried to regulate the size of a soda that you could buy when you go to the movies or go to a stadium or go to 7-Eleven. Michael Bloomberg tried to regulate the amount of salt from the mayor's office in New York that restaurants can use when preparing your food. New York City, by the way, one of the restaurant capitals of the world, and Michael Bloomberg thought it was his job to tell people how to season the food that they're serving in those restaurants. Also, Michael Bloomberg is an insane gun grabber who's been spending his personal fortune trying to make guns illegal across the country. Moms Demand Action may sound like a group of moms who are demanding action on illegal guns, but in reality, that's a Michael Bloomberg front group. Mayors against illegal guns started by Michael Bloomberg. And again, not against illegal guns. It's mayors trying to make guns illegal. Bloomberg, while mayor of New York City, actually sent police officers to other states in this country to go to gun dealerships and try to buy guns so that he can sue those dealerships for violating New York laws. He's the mayor of New York City, meaning his jurisdiction and the jurisdiction of his police department is within New York City, and he thought that it was okay for him to try to use his political power to force other states and other towns to comply with New York City gun control rules. Seriously, I could spend this whole video listing off the number of crazy schemes the Bloomberg administration came up with in order to get guns banned in other places across this country, but I'd be here all day. But for some reason, despite the fact that Michael Bloomberg holds positions that both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party would find completely toxic and untenable, Bloomberg is polling like 5th in the race, and a lot of normies, like normal people who don't follow politics, seem to believe that Michael Bloomberg is a serious candidate and he's somehow the candidate meant to bring America together. So despite the fact that a couple of months ago I would have told you that Michael Bloomberg had a 0% chance of securing the Democratic nomination, I mean, the guy's not even on the ballot until Super Tuesday, which means the first 3 or 4 primaries, he's not even a choice for people to vote for, and I think that's going to hurt him significantly. The fact is, all these normies that don't follow politics really believe that he's a legitimate candidate, and since this is a popularity contest, that means he's got a chance at securing the nomination, however small that chance might be. Alright, so now that we've wrapped up with Michael Bloomberg, I'm going to arbitrarily eliminate 3 of the candidates that will be on the debate stage, and that's Tom Steyer. I don't even know what this guy looks like. Every time I'm doing a video about the primaries, I'm like, who's this guy? Then I look it up. It turns out to be Tom Steyer. Pete Buttigieg, I think his time has passed. He had his little bump in the polls, but people are realizing that he's just younger, more inexperienced version of Joe Biden, and they're not really going to support him. And Amy Klobuchar, I know a lot of people think that Amy Klobuchar did well in the last debate, but it's not clobbering time. It's never going to be clobbering time. Stop pretending clobbering time is even a thing. And I want to move on to the top 2 candidates, the top 2 candidates that I actually predicted in my second video in January of last year when I was talking about the Democratic 2020 race, and that's Joe Biden and Bernard McSanderson. And we're going to start with Joe Biden, because Joe Biden may be the person that I get the most heat for, because for some reason, despite the fact that he's been holding that lead in the polls since he entered the race, there's a lot of people who believe that his support somehow doesn't count for whatever reason. And I've given the same exact reasons why Joe Biden is a serious candidate, and every single time you guys give me, well, he doesn't talk good and he misremembers things, as if being an eloquent speaker is a qualification for being the president of the United States. Evil Bad Orange Man isn't the most eloquent speaker. I don't know if you guys noticed that. So the idea that this would hurt Joe Biden doesn't make a lot of sense. But despite the fact that I keep saying it and it keeps remaining true that Joe Biden is the legitimate candidate, for some reason there's doubt in the hearts of the people out there on whether or not the polls and all this support that Joe Biden has maintained throughout this race is real. Well, let me break it to you. It is in fact real, and just because I'm one of 5 people on the internet telling you that it's real, that doesn't make it not true. Look, when you're covering politics and when you're assessing a candidate, it's important to not get invested in the outcome that you want and look at the data objectively and make your conclusions from that data. A lot of people keep throwing around the Hunter Biden thing in relation to Joe Biden as if that's a bigger controversy than it actually is, because in conservative media and on Twitter, that's presented as a bigger controversy than it actually is. The perception of corruption surrounding Hillary Clinton was significantly higher than the perception of corruption surrounding Joe Biden. And one of the things about Hillary Clinton is actually pretty corrupt is the fact that Chelsea Clinton was working for NBC and she did like 15 segments for them, and she was paid over $500,000 for 15 very pointless segments on NBC. This was obviously an attempt to buy influence in the Clinton family, because Chelsea Clinton ain't known for her charisma. Chelsea Clinton, not that exciting of a person. Obviously, the reason you hired Chelsea Clinton is because you think her mom is going to run for president, and you, as a news organization, want access to her mom. So one of the ways you get that is by giving Chelsea Clinton a bunch of money, allegedly under the guise that she's going to work for you, when in reality, you're trying to get influence with Hillary. Now, the reason I bring that up specifically is because of all the corruption stories connected to Hillary Clinton. That one is not likely to be in somebody's top 10 or top 20 or top 100, honestly, with Hillary Clinton, because stories involving candidates' children rarely have as big of an impact as you think on the election. So I don't think Biden, who doesn't have nearly the perception of corruption surrounding him that Hillary Clinton has, is gonna go down because of Hunter Biden. I just don't see that happening. Again, does Biden say weird, unintelligible things all the time? Does he forget where he is half the time? Yes. But that doesn't mean that Biden is not a legitimate candidate, and that doesn't mean that the name recognition and the fact that he was a vice president aren't great assets for him. And of course, there's the most important thing that is attributable to Joe Biden that people can't overlook, and that's the fact that he has significantly higher poll numbers among black voters than any other candidate. And considering the way that the Democratic primaries are structured, that after Iowa and New Hampshire, you start going through the Deep South where the majority of the voters are black, that's going to give Biden a huge lead from the jump. And nobody, and I mean absolutely nobody, has started eating into Biden's black support. I said it over a year ago, and I'll say it again. Biden has a good chance of winning in Iowa. He has a good chance of winning in New Hampshire. And if Biden finishes second in Iowa and in New Hampshire, there's a good chance that the Democratic Party is going to come down hard on Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg so that they can drop out and endorse Biden and hopefully funnel their support over to him. Nobody else in that race has that many connections and has that level of influence within the Democratic Party. And finally, we have the person that I projected to be one half of the final two with Joe Biden, and that's Bernard McSanderson. Bernie Sanders. Now, if you haven't been able to tell throughout the course of this channel, I'm not a fan of Bernie Sanders. I've never been a fan of Bernie Sanders. The guy's a socialist. Socialism is one of the most destructive ideologies in human history, and putting the modifier democratic in front of something terrible does not make it any less terrible. Bernie Sanders has spent his life praising socialist and communist dictatorships across the world. There's video of him doing so. There's video of him coming back from the USSR, doing propaganda for the USSR. Bernie's a terrible guy.
I think it's also fair to point out that when we were in Moscow, for example, I think most of the people here also were extremely impressed by their public transportation system. The stations themselves were absolutely beautiful, including many works of art, chandeliers that were beautiful. It was a very, very effective system. Also, I was impressed by the youth programs that they have, their palaces of culture for the young people, a whole variety of programs for young people, and cultural programs which go far beyond what we do in this country. We went to a theater in Yaroslavl, which was absolutely beautiful, had 3 separate stages where cultural programs are put on by professional actors and actresses, including a puppeteer area.
But despite the fact that Bernie Sanders is a harbinger of a very destructive ideology, I've never shortchanged him as a candidate, and if you go back to my original video, I said that this was going to be a 2-person race between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. The perception of Bernie Sanders is essentially the opposite perception that Elizabeth Warren has. Bernie Sanders is viewed as the authenticity candidate. Whether or not you agree with him or disagree with him, his long history of praising socialist and communist regimes shows you that he's serious about the fact that he's a socialist.
You know, it's funny, sometimes American journalists talk about how bad a country is because people are lining up for food. That's a good thing. In other countries, people don't line up for food. The rich get the food and the poor starve to death.
And we have to be honest, socialism is not a dirty word amongst people in the Democratic Party, especially in the hardcore Democratic base, the grassroots people. So Bernie Sanders coming off as an authentic socialist gives him a significantly better chance than other candidates like Elizabeth Warren in this race. Now, while it is true that you could pretty much sum up this Democratic primary process as people flirting with different candidates causing dramatic rises and dramatic falls in the polls, that has not been true for Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. while they've had some fluctuation in the polls, both of them seem to have a floor that other candidates don't have. I haven't seen a poll or more than one poll where Bernie Sanders has fallen below about 15%, meaning that unlike other candidates, he has a solid, dedicated base that's always going to be behind him. And Bernie Sanders right now is on an upswing because as other candidates fall in the polls, he and Joe Biden are sucking up some of that support. And while it might be fun in a year-long process with 38 million Democrats running for the presidential nomination to flirt with a random candidate here and there, what we can see as we're getting close to the Iowa caucus is all the Bernie Sanders supporters that were like, maybe I'll consider another candidate, have returned in force to back this guy. Bernie obviously does really well with young people. He obviously has the most enthusiastic support base. And based on his previous primary performance, we know that Bernie Sanders has a good advantage in caucus states. So Iowa, the first state, is a caucus state. New Hampshire is right after that, and it's a primary state. New Hampshire's also kind of a home field advantage for Bernie because he's from Vermont, so he's close to New Hampshire. So there's a good chance that we could be 2 primaries down, or a caucus and a primary down, and Bernie Sanders could have 2 big points on the board. Bernie's biggest problem this election cycle is the exact problem that he had in the previous cycle against Hillary Clinton. And that's that after Iowa and New Hampshire, we start running into the Deep South. And in the Deep South, the majority of the voters in the Democratic primary are black voters. And Biden, just like Hillary Clinton before him, polls significantly higher amongst those black voters than Bernie Sanders does. So Bernie needs those victories early on before he runs into that wall where he is almost certainly going to lose. This was, and always has been Bernie Sanders' biggest disadvantage going into a Democratic primary, and it was Hillary's biggest advantage, and it's also Joe Biden's biggest advantage going up against Sanders. But those are my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts about the 2020 race down in the comments below. That's all I really have for you guys today. If you like this video, then please show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. Follow me on all my social medias. If you'd like to support me, you can do so via Venmo, Patreon, PayPal, or Subscribestar, or you can buy something from my Teespring store. This has been me talking about the 2020 race. Till next time.